Tapping heads in Valorant, it's harder than meets the eye. On paper, it sounds so easy. Just put your crosshair onto their head and you'll be all good. Sounds pretty simple at first, until you hear the breakdown of all the components that go into setting yourself up for that. One of those components is peeking. If you aren't peeking your opponent properly, you're going to find yourself having a very hard time landing your shots. Peeking is more than just running around headfirst into the enemy. There are several ways to peek, and correctly doing so will grant you a huge advantage in a duel. That's what today's video is all about. Here is the ultimate peeking guide that will send you up the ranks of Valorant. Before we get into it, this video is just a glimpse of what we have to offer. If you want a full detailed guide on how to improve in Valorant, you're going to want to check out our website over at SkillCapped. But more on that at the end of the video. Before we start showcasing the peeks though, we have to talk about angle advantage. If you're too close to a wall while you're peeking, the enemy's going to be able to see your body first before you can see theirs. The wall is pretty much blocking your field of view, and this gives a big advantage to your enemy. They'll spot you earlier and therefore they can react before you. Because of this, you want to avoid being too close to a wall in front of you while peeking. This will widen your FOV, or field of view, to a more even playing field, so you can spot the enemy earlier and therefore you can react faster. First up, we've got short peeking. This is the most commonly used peek you're going to use in the game, but you do want to be cautious with it, which we'll talk about in a second. Short peeking is when you peek out just enough so you expose yourself to check one specific angle. Here, I'm exposing myself just enough to see A main at a popularly held angle. Short peeking is so commonly used for a few different reasons. A short peek ensures you won't overextend yourself, meaning, barring any surprises, short peeking allows you to challenge one angle or player and nobody else. You minimize the risk of exposing yourself to multiple enemies and getting into a man disadvantage. And along with that, because the peek is so short, you have easy access to cover and you can easily escape out of a duel that's going poorly. To top it all off, when short peeking, you have one specific target or angle in mind. With this instilled in your brain, you're able to pre-aim your crosshair so that when you do peek out, you'll be right at the enemy's head. There's no guessing to be done. Pre-aim with the peek, and if the enemy's there, shoot. If not, the angle's clear and you move on. In general, you don't want to expose yourself to the enemy for too long. Short peeking's also advantageous to accomplish this goal. If you want to make yourself a harder target to hit, you can shuffle back and forth between peeking and hiding, back to cover. By doing this repetitively, you give yourself a window to shoot the enemy, while also messing with the enemy's timing. They only get a brief instance to react and shoot before you've disappeared from their sights. When doing this shuffling maneuver, try to change up your timing a bit. You don't want to consistently peek at the same pace. Otherwise, the enemy's going to get used to it and they're going to be able to pick you off. Throw in a few delayed re-peeks to throw off their timing. If the enemy's just standing still and you're constantly peeking in and out, you're going to give yourself an advantage in the fight. You know exactly where the enemy will be and can properly prepare, while the enemy has to react based off of what you do, and that gives you control of the situation, therefore, better odds of winning the fight. Short peeking is the bread and butter of Valorant. You'll be using this for probably 90% of your engagements. To emphasize this, here's how you typically push onto a side. When short peeking, you're trying to challenge an angle that you think the enemy will hold. Here's a map of the most commonly held angles when going into the B side. If you feel like you don't know what angles are commonly used, start paying attention where players play in your games. Jot those down, and you'll quickly realize some similarities in their positions. Once we know the common angles, we'll simply run up and short peek them one by one as they come by. For ascent, we'll check B main, followed by this sneaky little back corner. From there, we'll glimpse into logs and mark it before progressing onto spawn. Finally, we work our way closer to the site at stairs, switch, and then halls. And voila! We've cleared a path to enter the site. That's simple enough, right? Well, without abilities, this is going to be a lot of angles to check while you push a site. Hopefully, your team will have some smokes ready to knock out some of these angles, which will reduce that number and allow you to push the site faster. Whether you have abilities or not, though, you likely won't be able to carefully peek all of these angles one by one. It just takes too much time, and that's why you want to still study the enemy's habits. Find out where they commonly play and prioritize those positions to short peek. This will save you time and allow you to more effectively push through sites. Now, here's the exact opposite of a short peek, the wide swing. And it's exactly what it sounds like. Instead of just peeking enough to spot the enemy, you're going to keep running a few extra steps before you stop. And this might seem counterintuitive at first. Why in the world would I want to keep running beyond when the enemy sees me? I'll be inaccurate while they can just bop me in the head. Well, there's a few reasons you want a wide swing. For one, let's say an enemy's holding a sharp angle with an operator. If you short peek, you're going to run right into that angle, and then they're going to blow you to smithereens. By wide swinging, you're forcing the enemy to have to make a more difficult flick shot to kill you. And this increases the chances of them missing, and it gives you an opportunity to shoot back and eliminate them if they miss. Now, we just mentioned trying to peek further away from a wall to increase angle advantage. Against an operator, there's an exception to the rule. If you're up close range against an operator, you want to peek out close. This is because at close range, your character model appears larger to the enemy. By wide swinging, your model's going to fly past the enemy's screen, making it difficult for them to make the proper flick shot to kill you. The other time you want a wide swing is when the enemy's expecting you to short peek. Like we said earlier, if you're being predictable and peeking with the same timings, the enemy's going to catch on and they're going to get an easy shot on you. If you want to make it harder for them, you can perform 1 or 2 short peeks, then follow it up with a wide swing. The enemy now has to make a micro adjustment from where they thought you were going to peek from, and that increases the room for error. Therefore, it gives you the opportunity to shoot back as they try to fix their crosshair placement. When going up against enemies, rule of thumb, change up your peeks, make yourself unpredictable. If we repeatedly peek out the same way at the same angle, the enemy's going to catch on. Then they'll be able to pre-aim towards that direction. Next time you peek, they're going to blow your head off. A good way to switch it up is to alternate between short peeking and wide peeking. By doing this, the enemy has to make micro adjustments to hit you. That increases their chances of missing, and it gives you a better opportunity to take them out. An even better option, if it's available to you, is to completely change your position. For example, in double boxes here, we can alternate between peeking from the left side or the right side. Now this would be a huge angle change that the enemy has to adjust for. They'll have to make a much tougher flick shot to kill you. If you happen to have repositioning abilities like Jet's Dash or Omen's TP, those are also great ways to change your position and catch the enemy off guard. The point we're trying to make here is never let the enemy predict your next move. Switch up your peeks and positioning so they're forced to make some type of adjustment to eliminate you. It gives you a better opportunity to win out the duel. You're prepared for them, but they're not prepared for you. Alright, so now we know wide peeking and short peeking. This essentially covers the main techniques that you're going to utilize when challenging an enemy, but there's more layers we can delve into to figure out when exactly we should be peeking. For all the examples we've shown so far, we've just been peeking as one player without any sort of abilities. This is known as dry peeking. You're going for a straight up gunfight against a player. In most cases, you don't want to dry peek if you don't have to. This would be essentially a raw aim duel, and whoever has the better aim and peeking is gonna win. We can do better than that. When going for a duel, you either want to utilize a man advantage or abilities, just to give yourself an extra oomph. For example, if you've identified an enemy and have a teammate nearby, call for him to peek out together. This is known as double peeking. If possible, you should always peek with a teammate. The chances of you winning a 2v1 compared to a 1v1 is much greater. Along with that, having a teammate increases the odds that, at the very least, you're going to come out with a 1v1 trade. If you just go for the 1v1 and lose, that's it. Your team loses a player and has to try to win with a man down. Double peeking doesn't have to be just from the same angle though. In fact, peeking the same position from 2 separate angles is even better. This is known as a crossfire. When an enemy peeks out in this situation, they'll get shot from multiple directions. At best, they might be able to target one player and eliminate them, but in order for the enemy to kill the second player, they're gonna have to make a difficult flick shot. And this is what makes crossfires so powerful. The chances of them succeeding in that are pretty slim, unless you're playing with someone like TenZ, in which case, you might still be in some trouble. Now let's talk about abilities. Whenever possible, you want to utilize your abilities to assist with your peeks. This can appear in multiple fashions. For example, the simplest is just a flash. If you blind the enemy before peeking, they're not going to be able to really fight back. This is going to be an easy kill, unless the RNG gods are with them and they'll blindly kill you with a lucky spray. You've also got Molotovs. If you know where an enemy's hiding, you could chuck a molly at them to force them to come out. Then they'll have to move away. You can prepare for this and get an easy headshot afterwards. There are also informational abilities like Sova's Owl Drone and Recon Bolt that can identify enemy locations. By knowing where the enemy is, You can adjust your crosshair placement and peaks accordingly to match their position and go for a fight with that info. Riot's intention with abilities is just to help you frag, so make sure to utilize them if they're available to you and gain that extra edge when peeking out against an enemy. Only once all of your abilities are used up and you don't have any teammates around should you decide to go for a dry peek. Dry peeking solo should be your absolute last resort, with teamwork and ability usage always coming first. Let's take things one step further now. This is Jiggle peeking. Jiggle peeking is when you're repeatedly running back and forth against a choke point. You don't actually run far enough to see the enemy though. The idea here is you just expose a small part of your body to the enemy. Then the enemy's going to be tempted to shoot at you, which will give away their location. This is particularly useful when you're unsure of whether an enemy has an operator. Jiggle peeking can bait out a shot from them. You can then use that information to decide on your next game plan. You have multiple options here. You could challenge the operator as they reload, use abilities to force the operator away, or just rotate to another choke point. Knowing where the enemy is and what equipment they have can greatly impact how you want to approach a duel. With Jiggle peeking, you're safely seeking that information without having to waste an ability. There's also another technique that's just as effective: strafe jumping. This one's a little bit more advanced than Jiggle peeking, but with some practice, you'll get it in a jiffy. To strafe jump, you're going to run towards the choke point that you're trying to peek. As you're about to peek out, you're going to jump. At the same time of the jump, you're going to glide your mouse and hold the appropriate lateral key to dash quickly under cover. The initial forward momentum will allow you to spy for enemies, while also not exposing too much of your body for a prolonged period of time. The jump also changes your vertical positioning, meaning if someone was shooting at headshot level, at best, they're going to land a body or a leg shot on you. This is another great option to gather information while making yourself a very difficult target to hit, or especially eliminate. We recommend attempting to learn both methods and utilizing the one that feels most comfortable and natural for you to perform. Jump peeking gives more of a visual idea of where enemies are while also changing your vertical position. However, it's a little more risky in the sense that if done incorrectly, you'll expose too much of your body and get hit. This is typically okay though, as you'll want to mainly use these techniques to spot out an operator or any abilities that have been placed. Jiggle peeking is safer and easier to execute as you can start slow and carefully ease your way into it. However, only downside here, you won't be able to visually see the enemy. Alright, now you have the big foundational pieces to your game with the peaks we've gone over so far, but we're not done yet. Here are a few more advanced or niche peeking techniques that can be helpful for more specific scenarios in the game. This one is the jump peek. This is when you jump out wide towards the angle to peek it. You await your landing so you're accurate before you shoot your shots. Primarily, you'll be using this technique when going up against an operator. If you peek regularly, the enemy's probably already scoped you in at that angle and it's going to eliminate you easy peasy. If you'd like to decrease your chances of getting shot, you can jump peek instead. This wide peek forces the enemies to have to flick over to you. Now it's a much harder shot for them, and if they miss, now you have a small opening to shoot back. This is most effective when it's operator versus operator. Now, you could jump peek with a rifle, but you're going to have to be very confident you'll hit the headshot right off the rip. If not, the enemy's probably going to get away. Now, with any kind of peek, there's going to be some risks, right? If the enemy's good at flick shots, you're probably still going to go down. However, if your other options haven't worked out yet, this could be another tool in your tool belt to counter that menacing operator. And last, we have crouch peeking. You've probably done this technique at some point in time, but you just didn't realize it. When peeking an enemy, you immediately crouch before you start to fire your weapon. This technique can work super well at higher elos like Platinum and up. Now, the reason for this is that these players tend to have good crosshair placement at head level. Because of that, crouching down is going to force them to have to adjust their crosshair to still land the headshot. Either that, or they'll miss. Crouch peeking isn't really good to use against lower elo players for the exact opposite reasoning. These players tend to aim more towards the body or the floor. So if you crouch down, you're just presenting your head to them and giving them an easier time of landing a headshot. Now, please note, you also have to adjust your own crosshair when crouch peeking. Crouching will pull your crosshair down, so you're going to have to make that slight adjustment upwards to accommodate for that. Crouch peeking is good against any weapons other than an operator. These players are already aiming at your body, so crouching down won't be too helpful here. Plus, crouching limits your mobility afterwards, so you want to stay mobile when facing an operator. So avoid this peek when going against them. Well, that's all we got for today's video. We hope this gave you a wide variety of ideas on how you want to peek and eliminate your enemies. And as always, we here at SkillCapped want to thank you all so much for watching. We'll catch you in the next one.